Hey everybody, we're going to talk about story parts for reading today. So what I have behind me here, and I'll sit down to show you, is our little story parts poster. When you are reading a book, it's good to know how to summarize that book. And when you are summarizing the book, you are going to try to summarize it using the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I put these shapes up here because this helps me remember all the parts that are in the beginning, the middle, and the end. So at the top, you can see what shape. I bet you said triangle. You're right. At the top, you can see a triangle. And I'm going to grab red here, and I'm just going to write a B in the middle so that you remember that the triangle represents the beginning of the story. And in the beginning of a story, what you are looking for as a good reader is you are looking for three things. And that's why we use a triangle, right? Because it's got three corners. So in the beginning of the story, you are looking for the characters. You always want to find out who the book is about. So the characters are first, and the characters can be people. They could be animals, right? So at the beginning, and this is for fiction stories, friends, this doesn't really work. We don't really use story parts with nonfiction. So this is for fiction stories. So as you start reading, you should always be looking for who are the characters. Are they people? Is it cats? And look for that main character. Most stories have one character that the story is mostly about, and that's called the main character. The next thing you want to pay attention to at the beginning of the story is the setting. And the setting, maybe in first grade, you might have talked about setting and you just talked about the place. But now that you're in second grade, you want to think of place, time. You could even think of the weather, if that has something to do with the story. If it's unimportant to the story, don't bother with it. But you definitely want to think of the place. So I'm just going to draw a little house here for our setting. And you want to think of like the time. Maybe that could be like what time of day. A lot of times that affects the events in the story. You could also think of the time of year. That might affect the events in the story. If time has nothing to do with the story, again, that's not something you'll want to be thinking about as a reader. But sometimes, let's say it's winter time, that's probably has a lot to do with the story. Maybe there's traffic because of the snow, or there's a snowstorm or something like that. Okay? So again, think of setting as place, time of year, or even time of day. Maybe it's a nighttime story. Last part in story parts for the beginning is you want to find out what the problem is. Usually the author will tell you the problem at the beginning of the story, and the problem is what goes wrong. Okay, so what goes wrong in the story? And I'm just going to draw a little like lightning bolt for my problem. All right, so oh no, something went wrong. And that's what you want to think about at the beginning. Okay? So again, triangle, we're looking for beginning of the story. We're looking for characters, setting, problem. Now I'm going to change my color for the middle. And the middle you can see is a rectangle. And this is all the middle is for the events. And when I write events in the middle, I'm going to number them because it's important that you tell your events in order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and there might be more than that. I'm going to put a ... because there may be more than 4 important events. But that square helps you remember the events because there's 4 corners. So try to tell 4 events. Sometimes stories are short. Maybe there's only 3 events, and that's okay too. Now your events are things that the character does to solve the problem. Okay? So you do need to make sure as a reader when you are thinking about the events, you're only thinking about the ones that help the character solve this problem. A lot of things happen in the book that aren't important. The important ones are what is the character doing first, maybe next, then last to solve this problem. And then, of course, at the end of stories, guess what happens? Most stories, the problem is solved, right? So at the end, the reason it's a circle is because you're wrapping up the story. The problem is solved. We call that a solution. Sometimes in that story, you might have what we call like a resolution. Maybe something happens next, so the problem gets solved, and then the characters are friends. So there might be like a little extra to that ending. Or in some stories, remember, there's morals, there's lessons that the characters learned. So as you are reading, I want you looking for these parts in your reading. I want you looking for characters, setting, problem. Try to think about what things did the character do to solve the problem. Those are the events. And then, of course, make sure you find out, how did that problem get solved? What's the solution?